Well, welcome again to Earlswood Baptist Church House Group as we return to the Gospel of Mark. We're going to return to Mark's Gospel for just 3 weeks and look at chapter 6. I'm afraid then it's going to be the run-in towards Christmas. I'm sorry guys, but it really is that close. So in chapter 6, Mark describes both miracle and lack of miracle and mission. And the account is split by the demise of John the Baptist. Our reading for today is Mark chapter 6, verses 1 to 13, where Jesus tries to minister at home in Nazareth, and the disciples then go out on mission.
Jesus left there and went to his hometown accompanied by his disciples. When the Sabbath came, he began to teach in the synagogue, and many who heard him were amazed. "Where did this man get these things?" they asked. "What's this wisdom that has been given him? What are these remarkable miracles he's performing? Isn't this the carpenter? Isn't this Mary's son and the brother of James, Joseph, Judas, and Simon? Aren't his sisters here with us?" And they took offense at him. Jesus said to them, "A prophet is not without honor except in his own town, among his relatives, and in his own home." He couldn't do any miracles there, except lay hands on a few people who were ill and heal them. He was amazed at their lack of faith. Then Jesus went around teaching from village to village. Calling the 12 to him, he began to send them out 2 by 2 and gave them authority over impure spirits. These were his instructions. "Take nothing for the journey except a staff. No bread, no bag, no money in your belts. Wear sandals, but not an extra shirt. Whenever you enter a house, stay there until you leave that town. And if any place will not welcome you or listen to you, leave that place and shake the dust off your feet as a testimony against them." They went out and preached that people should repent. They drove out many demons and anointed with oil many people who were ill and healed them.
As usual with these readings from Mark, I've just recorded a few thoughts that maybe will help you think about it at home and will prompt our discussion on the Zoom in house group. We start with Jesus trying to do miracles and spread the kingdom in his hometown of Nazareth. This is fascinating really, because crowds had gathered when he'd been in the surrounding towns and villages in Capernaum and places like that. But the moment he gets back to the place he came from, where he was born, everyone remembers him and remembers him as the odd job man's son. And somehow he can't seem to do any miracles. Perhaps we all know, isn't it, that it can be very hard to share the gospel at home. Certainly for you and me, our children and our family, they know us only too well, and perhaps they know our failings only too well. It sometimes doesn't always help our witness as Christians. But surely that couldn't apply to Jesus. Perhaps he was too good for people's liking. Maybe it was the fact that Jesus didn't say what they wanted to hear was the reason they rejected him. They wanted to hear that the Romans were going to be kicked out of Israel. They weren't really interested in the gospel of the kingdom and didn't really want to follow Jesus. But perhaps we can also take out of this that people do change and be encouraged, because Jesus' family, who are so against him in bits of the gospel and here, they become the centre of the early church, become important church leaders, and indeed James heads the Jerusalem church. So we can but pray that what we see now around us in family and friends will change in the future. The topic of faith keeps coming up in Mark and in house group, doesn't it? Whose faith is important? I know we've talked about this several times before, but here perhaps we see, if you like, an atmosphere or a general feeling of faith or lack of it surrounding Nazareth. There's just total lack of interest, and even perhaps those who wanted to be healed and had faith were swamped by those around who hadn't got faith and didn't want Jesus there at all. I think we quite often see the same thing. We talk about there not being the right feeling for a meeting or not the faith for a meeting, and it's not necessarily us. It's perhaps the society we live in or what's going on around us that affects us. And sometimes this can be broken by prayer, maybe fasting, but sometimes it won't be, as I guess we see here with Jesus. If nothing else, the message we get out of this again is that with faith, one size doesn't fit all. It's like healing. There are a million ways that Jesus healed, I'm sure. Everyone is different. And in the same way, faith seems to work in all sorts of different ways, depending on the situation and the people involved. When the disciples go out on mission, it's a different story, isn't it? They seem to be remarkably successful. And let's look to the future. They were very successful here, but they also had their failings in the gospel. And in the end, they became martyrs for their faith. Not sure whether that's a success or a failure, isn't it? It's interesting when we read the Gospels that Luke describes the same mission and allows them to take a purse with them and carry rather more with them. Perhaps when talking to Romans and Gentiles, he realised that going out without your wallet was just totally silly. No one would do that. Perhaps the point of the story is less what they carried, but more how they went about their business. What the Gospel writers are trying to get over was the urgency in the times and the urgency in the message. They moved on if the message wasn't well received. Perhaps we ought to learn from that sometimes and be prepared to move on from people and places. And I like the point too that they were prepared and they were instructed to accept the hospitality they were given. Sometimes as Christians we're very keen to give, whether it's practical things or the gospel. We find it more difficult to receive. And actually, being prepared to receive things is a greater blessing to the people who give it, as indeed for them to receive something. And we also have the rather interesting thing here where we see the disciples seeing more fruit in their ministry than Jesus did. That's an encouragement for us, isn't it? Perhaps we might occasionally see even more than we read about in the Gospels. I wish that were true. So to summarise today, let's not be too discouraged when we find that our family and friends are the ones who are most resistant to the Gospel. Keep praying and things may change. Faith is again seen to be essential in what goes on in the Gospels, but there are no magic formulae for how to get faith or apply faith or see faith. It just seems to be different every time. And let's take note, the mission, the gospel is urgent. And the key thing is that it totally relies on Jesus. Well, enjoy thinking about those, and I'm sure we'll enjoy talking about them on Zoom.